이것은 바나나입니다. And in order to find out what's the relationship between this banana and Apple, I'm going to take you through a story about how companies are built. Everybody knows of Apple. In fact, people love Apple products so much and Apple quality so much that it's today the biggest company on the planet. I invest in startups. They start with 2 or 3 people. And what I observed across investing in over 100 companies is that startups are not like Apple. Actually, this came from a team of Apple engineers I invested into. And they told me that, well, we don't have the Apple resources. We cannot invest hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing. We cannot employ 10,000 people overnight. We don't have stores around the planet. So it got me thinking, today, if an Apple was built, what would they do? Everybody knows the story of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who started in a garage in Palo Alto. And Steve Jobs was quite the adventurer. He loved calligraphy. He studied it. He loved technology. He worked in it. He was also quite a fruitarian and vegetarian, and he even went to India and experienced mind enhancers, that kind. So in a way, Steve Jobs was very consciously and culturally curious. With Steve Wozniak, they were the perfect team. They built the Apple One, which doesn't look like something you would want to buy today. But at that time, it resonated with a little group of people who bought it. They were the early adopters, and only 200 Apple One were built at that time. In fact, their very first run of production was only for 50 units. And they sold for about $125,000 worth of it in today's dollar. $125,000 is some kind of Kickstarter campaign. This actually led them to get to market and built the Apple II, which many years later became the Macintosh as they perfected their product market fit. At that time, back in the 70s, the world was quite different, and the Apple team literally leveraged the perfect storm. The silicon was in the Silicon Valley, as did lots of the factories back then. The capital, the talent, and the market was all in the US. And they moved in the trend, which was going from mainframe to personal computing. So it got me thinking, we're in 2015, what will the Apple of the 70s do today? In 2015, hardware is hardly new. We're all buying devices, and actually their development was pretty linear for a long time. There was a technology discovery, which led to product developments, and then to manufacturing, and the next step in general was commoditization. The smartphone era changed things quite a bit, and by now you've all heard of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is not that simple. It's about hardware, it's about ecosystem and communities, and it's about the layer of artificial intelligence which makes devices better, faster, and smarter. So if you had 2 guys in a garage in Oakland, California, because Palo Alto is way too expensive today, what would they build? Well, you can't deny that today you can build anything, and that's the problem. The fact is that what companies have to think about is it worthwhile? So the Apple of today would not build a smartphone. There are billions of them. It will probably not build either an activity tracker, because this is way too simple. There are a few sensors, an application, and a bracelet. Nah. In fact, The Apple of today, or of the 70s, will not build, wait for it, a smartwatch. It will also be very, very cognizant of a lot of other trends happening in the world and lots of other companies which are making hardware become a commodity, or as I like to call it, a Xiaomization here, where a lot of the products that are being built in China are going to the way that is very cheap and essentially leverage other business models. So if you were a startup today, 2 people, you will have to do something different, because the only advantage that you have is your speed and your flexibility. The advances in prototyping are tremendous. You've all heard of 3D printing by now, but a lot of other tools are becoming available, whether it's on the hardware or on the software. In the software space, Arduino and Raspberry Pi have been tremendously efficient in creating these new breeds of devices. And other startups, such as Spark, for example, helps companies build connected devices through Wi-Fi and 3G in a matter of minutes. It would have taken months and millions of dollars in the past for a company starting from scratch to build those layers in the cloud. But that's not all. There are also advances being made in prototyping for hardware. This is, for example, a company called Volterra, which is printing circuits. Today, if you want to print circuits, well, you're going to have to take weeks, because you will have to send it to a factory, which will then in turn return that to you. But now you can build them in minutes. The next step is quite the unusual one. From prototyping to production, you will actually go through a phase of productization. Because as a startup, you don't have time to learn how things are built. You want to be educated, but you will also want to leverage the best of it. So you will head to Shenzhen, where a little revolution has been happening in the past few years through a movement called Shanghai. This is not an Apple Watch. Certainly looks like one. But if you look inside of it, what's interesting is that it's actually a phone. It has a SIM card. It has an SD card slot. It even has a camera and a radio. Not too sure if you want to listen to radio on your phone, on your wrist, but why not? But more importantly, because people know how to build things, and how to build things cheap, efficient, and with quality these days, it's actually only $45 retail. This means that the cost of this product is below $15 to make. All this is possible because of the rise of the Shenzhen ecosystem and a supply chain which has been built for mass manufacturing over the last 30 years, but that hardware startups can now leverage. In a sense, the silicon has moved to Shenzhen from Silicon Valley. Startups have numerous tools now in order to get worldwide distribution. Before, it would have taken them years to get distributed in every country, but today, of course, with the internet, they can go further. But not only that, but they can get pre-orders, which means pre-revenue to get to market. There are hundreds of companies that have launched crowdfunding campaigns on websites such as Kickstarter and Indiegogo and reached millions of dollars of revenue or pre-revenue, which helped them get to the next stage, which is manufacturing. And if you started productizing in the place where you are going to do the manufacturing, things go a lot faster. You don't have to learn everything again about how to take a product to market and how to manufacture it, and you will focus on cost optimization. You will actually do that in factories that don't look like the factories that Apple is using today, which are gigantic. They will be actually a lot smaller and a lot more dedicated, because startups are not building millions of devices when they get started. They only build a few thousand. Finally, the last piece of equation for all those companies will be hardware investments and investors in general. And in the last 2 years, the investment in hardware startups has been picking up significantly, with companies like Magic Leap being funded with $500 million. This is unheard of. So essentially, what we've seen in the last few years is a democratization of hardware creation, and companies today are global from day one. But also, speed to market is crucial. Why? Because hardware is hardly enough. Companies today have to build ecosystem. They have to have a community and other peoples to jump on their platform. As we've seen with commoditization, it's going extremely fast, and this is the place you don't want to be because they're actually relying on new business models and new sales channels that only big companies can provide. Companies in general, also in startup land, won't be able to focus on extremely long-term things because they take too much money in research and development for robotics, for example, or other more heavy R&D things. Companies today have a sweet spot which is right in the middle between the project ecosystem innovation and the difficulty. This is why you see an explosion of devices today on the market that can touch the gaming world, smart homes, the health, the human-computer interaction, advanced body sensing. Every single market on the planet today is actually attacked by hundreds of startups. But this is only beginning, because the last layer of all is the artificial intelligence. And as a startup, today you will actually have to build all those if you want to be able to compete against big companies. And in fact, this is the true last boundary that we're going to observe in the next 5 years, because the true value of the Internet of Things today hasn't been realized. Things don't really talk to each other yet. Last year, I participated to the launch of a company called NextThinko, which built a camera. Doesn't seem super special, but there is actually a computer in this camera, which means that the device can update itself. This means that the actual software can modify the hardware anytime just by having it updating on the fly. This went relatively unnoticed, and they actually sold only 400 of them, which is obviously not enough to make it a sustainable company. And the reason is that the cost of the device was $200 for a new kind of camera, essentially. For an entire year, this team has been working on something that will be groundbreaking, which was, how can we make this device become a $50 device instead? Well, that will require quite some work on the supply chain, and maybe actually go down to building your own silicon. And this is what they've built. Chip is a $9 computer that is about a quarter the size of a banana. And Chip is today on Kickstarter. He's reaching 30,000 backers, and is one of the most successful campaigns ever. Why are people excited about this chip? Well, $9 is the price of a coffee downstairs. But with $9, that means that you can actually now create the next generation of devices. They will not be smart and connected. They will be smarter. They won't need your mobile phone. They will just be useful on their own. So essentially, we're moving from the connectivity to the sensors to having fully on computers and apps on things. Companies are already thinking this way and leveraging this platform. There is actually a Korean company we're working with called BBB, which fully understood how to leverage the Shenzhen ecosystem, the San Francisco one, and build devices in just 3 months that can track with a single drop of blood disease that you may have. Why is this important? Well, at the moment, they can track one thing, but because they will be able to update this hardware over time, when you're at home and when you want it, they will be able to add the tracking of 20 more diseases or 50 more diseases. And those results will be automatically sent to your doctor or to the hospital or anybody that you think is interested in that data. So today, things are different. The silicon is in Shenzhen. We're moving from personal computers to computers in things. The markets are global, the talents are global, and the capital is global. And we're moving toward a world where innovation is stateless. It can start in Korea, have a period in China, then a period in the US, then anywhere the entrepreneurs see fit. Because those entrepreneurs have to leverage the best ecosystems on the planet in order to be able to compete with those big companies. Today, in order to win, companies have to think strategically, do something hard, launch fast, learn from their customers, and move on. So the remaining question is, now, what kind of Apple will you guys build? 감사합니다.